Welcome to the Selling from the Heart podcast on the Salescast Network. You've joined a global movement of sales professionals who are dedicated to being authentic and building trust. We call it Selling from the Heart. Together, we are on a mission to bring sincerity and substance to the sales profession we all love. Get ready to be inspired and equipped as we join our hosts, Larry Levine and Daryl Amy.
As we begin this new year, one of the questions on everyone's mind is, how am I going to make this year more successful than last year?
We get it. There are only 24 hours in a day. I've always thought to myself, wouldn't it be great if you can create more time?
The good news is you can create more time. Our friends at Work Better Now have cracked the code. With a virtual assistant, you can offload the tasks that consume your time so you can focus on more of what drives results.
Our virtual assistant from Work Better Now has freed up time so we can focus on building the Selling from the Heart movement. It's cost effective and easy.
I know this can work for you. To learn more, visit www.workbetternow.com or click the link in the show notes for a free consultation so you can free up time and make 2024 your best year yet. Hello and welcome back to the Selling from the Heart podcast. Your co-host, Daryl Amy, here today with Larry Levine. What's going on, Larry?
Hey, Daryl, I tell you what isn't going on. 2024 has been an exciting year thus far. Great seeing you. We're in for a treat today.
We got the master storyteller himself, Mark Carpenter, is in the house. You're going to have a great time. This is one you're going to want to grab a pen and notepad for. Larry, it is exciting. 2024 is off to an incredible start. Here we are. We've just celebrated the holiday for love and all of that, Valentine's Day. I will tell you something, though.
I got my red on, Daryl.
You got your red on if you're watching on video. By the way, we're on YouTube. We're live on LinkedIn every Saturday morning at 7:30 Central Time when this kicks off. If you want to catch us on video and see Larry's fabulous red sweatshirt. But, you know, we had Valentine's Day and all of that. But I want to say I love the community that has formed around Selling from the Heart. And this community gathers regularly. It's called the Insiders Group. And I'm just so thankful for the friendships and the encouragement of like-hearted people all around us, Larry. It's just such a great thing.
No, it is. And there's someone who just found his way into the Selling from the Heart Insiders Group over the last several months. Jeremy Seegers, you are a rock star and you add so much to the Insiders Group. Just wanted to say thank you. Thank you to each and every one of you. Come hang out with us. We meet every single Friday, like-hearted, like-minded salespeople, sales leaders. Come hang out with us.
Yeah. And you know what? You may not be able to make it every single Friday. Not everyone can. And it's so cool because in between we could communicate on a private social network. It's just such a great thing. So come hang out with us, sellingfromtheheart.net/free-pass. You can find that link in the show notes. We'd love to see you at a future up close and personal. And this is such a great day today, Larry. We've got a phenomenal guest. We've got Mark Carpenter on the show today. He is a serial storyteller and the co-author of the best-selling book, Master Storytelling. Mark has turned his passion for storytelling into a career spanning marketing communications, academics, and corporate training. He now teaches the art of crafting stories that teach, lead, sell, and inspire in both business and personal realms. With a vibrant style honed over the decades in communication and teaching, Mark brings stories to life in impactful ways. When he's off duty, you'll find him hiking in Utah, playing piano, and even writing children's books. Get ready to learn the power of storytelling with our friend Mark Carpenter. Welcome to Selling from the Heart. It's great to have you here.
Daryl, Larry, great to be here with you. I'm honored to be on your show. Thank you so much for what you're bringing into the world too. This concept of selling from the heart, anything from the heart kind of gets to me because that's how we connect as people.
I love it. I love it. And I'm looking forward to this conversation. Mark, you know, as we get started, though, there is a question that we ask every single guest, and that is, what does it mean to you to sell from the heart?
And I kind of started with that. To me, it's about connecting as human beings. It's about connecting as humans, not as transactions. I think too often we get into selling and we start thinking transactions. We don't think people. And so selling from the heart to me is about connecting as human beings.
You know what, Mark? I'm glad that you brought up the whole connecting word. So I'm going to spit, and I know you can handle this, Mark. I'm throwing Mark Carpenter on the spot again, but what's connecting look like to you? When you say connecting as humans, what's that mean to you?
Well, I'll tell a story as my way to answer that, which is kind of what I do. I had a call just a couple of weeks ago with somebody who's completely on the other side of the world from me. I mean, we are literally 12 hours of time zones apart from each other. So it was my late at night. It was his first thing in the work morning. And you would think, oh, we don't have that much in common. But as we started talking to each other, we found that we have in common what all of us have in common. We're human beings. He had some experiences that I could relate to. I had some experiences that he could relate to. He told me the story of how he got excited and into storytelling in his career. And it was just an awesome moment where here's this person completely on the other side of the world from us. And because we have this common human experience, we could relate to each other. We were on the phone for, maybe 40 minutes. And I walked away feeling like I had a new friend on the other side of the world.
I love it. I love it. And this is what's so cool about this whole concept of storytelling, especially in the context of selling from the heart. I've heard it said, Mark, that the language of the heart is stories. You know, you may speak English, you may speak French, you may speak German, Spanish, whatever. But we have this common language of the heart around stories, which I think is so, so beautiful. I'd love it as we start off, if you could give us a flyover of this whole concept of master storytelling and how you got involved in bringing this to the forefront.
Well, I'll first go back to what you just said, Daryl, which is storytelling is how we make sense of the world as a species. This is how we connect to things. This is how we, I think evolutionarily, this is how we figured out who was in our tribe and who wasn't, and how we could survive the world. Don't go over to that area. That's where the predators live. Don't eat that plant. That one will kill you. You know, this is how we made sense of the world.
That reminds me of Uncle Al. When Uncle Al ate that plant. Let me tell you what happened. You don't want to hear that story.
But again, it's a story. We remember it. We connect to it because that's how we make sense as human beings. That's how we make sense of the world. And I think really that in my introduction, you talked about me being a serial storyteller. I think it really started out as a kid. My mom was an English and reading teacher. And so we always had books around the house. And so story was always important to me. I was a middle child. And so I was always trying to find a way to get attention. Stories are a great way to get attention because you can get people to laugh or capture their hearts and minds. That transitioned into a career in marketing communications and public relations, and then into teaching. And I just had this realization that this is how we connect as human beings. And I got together with my good friend, who's also named Daryl and spells it the same way that you do, Daryl. Awesome. And he and I co-authored this book, Master Storytelling, really initially with the idea of helping leaders connect with their people and helping facilitators connect as they teach. And then we found that there's also a huge market in sales because, again, this is how we connect as human beings. And people will buy from those they know, trust, and like. Storytelling is a great way to get people to know, trust, and like you.
So, and I love this stuff because I enjoy telling stories. I also love listening to great stories as well, Mark. So walk us through the framework. What's a good framework look like? Because I know there's salespeople listening who are great at storytelling. There's some that are just getting started. There's some leaders who are really good at them. Some people struggle with them. Walk us through, based on your book, what's a good framework for a master storyteller? What's that look like from beginning to middle to end? Coach us through that.
And I'll start with our definition of what we talk about when we talk about stories, because we're not talking about corporate fables. We're not talking about making something up. We're talking about taking real life experiences and turning them into compelling stories that are maybe 2.5, 3 minutes long. So we're not talking about big epic tales or things like that, which I think is why it really applies into the sales profession, because we don't have a 3.5 hour movie to be able to show somebody in a sales conversation. We need to convey to them important messages. But the process, the structure that we use, it really begins with, what is your intention? What is your purpose for telling this story? And so you need to start there understanding, okay, I've got this experience that I think conveys a message that I need to convey to this client or to my leadership or to members of my team. But what's my purpose in telling this? And so beginning with that as a focus, I think is really, really important. Once you do that, there's a simple structure that we teach people that just has 3 parts. There's an introduction where you set the stage. Here's who's involved with it. Here's the challenge that they were facing. And then there has to be some kind of conflict into that. What's getting in the way of them achieving the goal that they're trying to achieve? And then the change is what we call the end part. What changed to make it so they could accomplish that? Or what happened to keep them from accomplishing their goal that you can learn from so that you don't make those same mistakes going forward? And so that largely it's that 3-part structure that we teach people. There's a lot of people that teach storytelling in kind of long form, 8 parts, 12 parts, 18 parts. I've heard all these different things. We want to keep it really simple for people because we don't want to overcomplicate something that's only going to be 3 minutes long. Mm-hmm. And so that structure of intro, conflict, change is what we teach people all the time.
Super, super practical. And so I'm curious if you can think of an example of a story that that you might tell as a salesperson or a leader. And by the way, we say this all the time in the Selling from the Heart podcast: leadership and sales right in the same lane. Leadership is influence, sales is influence. We're all trying to influence change. So those 2 things are so parallel. So think about a leader or a salesperson. What's a good example of this in a story? We'll have some story time right now with Mark Carpenter.
Well, as you can imagine, my mind is racing through, okay, which one?
I know, you got the Rolodex of stories, right?
Yeah. I got this bank built up of all the different stories in there. So I think I'll go to this one. This was a little bit of a learning point for me in selling master storytelling. As I was talking to a sales professional, and he was very passionate about master storytelling. And I said, tell me where you have used storytelling most effectively in your life right now. And he said, it's less with my customers, it's more with my leadership. I said, what do you mean? He said, I meet with my leadership twice a month. And if I'm right on goal, if I'm right on target, they say, great, fine, keep going. If I'm off, I start getting rah-rah speeches and telling me what I should do different. Because I used to just share with them, here's my numbers, here's where I am. But I found that if I could take an experience from that past couple of weeks and say, here's why these numbers are showing up as they're showing up, and tell them the story of where things are standing, all of a sudden my leaders go, yeah, you're doing great, keep it going, regardless of what my numbers look like, because they understand the context of those numbers. And I love that because I teach sales leadership. Make sure you get your team the why into the what they're doing, not just what they're doing and what you need them to do, but why. And storytelling can help get to the why. But he turned that around for me and said, I'm helping my leadership understand why I am where I am in my sales process here. And he found that a very effective tool to help his leadership connect to him and connect to what he was really doing in his day-to-day work.
Oh, so I like this. I just had flashbacks of a couple things, but we won't go there, Mr. Carpenter. We definitely don't want to go there. However, I do want to bring up a point. And the point is, because this is going to be sale. We're still on storytelling, but just please follow with me because this will make sense. There's some salespeople that love telling big, grandiose stories when they're sitting in front of sales leadership on how they got to where they're at. And then there's going to be some leaders that are going to say, don't tell me the story, Mark, just give me the details on this. So in that example, how do you know when to tell it? How do you know when to tell the story, when not to tell the story, when to tell the glorified story, when to do the snippet story? You get where I'm saying? Because what you just said, I think, lives through the day in the life of every salesperson out there in dealing with leadership. You get what I'm saying?
Absolutely. And this ties to one of the key sales skills that we need to make sure that we focus on, and that's listening. You've got to listen for what's the right time, what's the right environment to do that within. You made the statement, Larry, they like to tell these grandiose stories. Well, if you've got 5 minutes with a person, this is not the time for a grandiose story. Use a quick snippet example and really trim that story down. But again, thinking of what's the point you're trying to make. I think that's the biggest barrier, is that we get so caught up into, oh, I have this great story to tell. I want to just tell this story. But we don't think, why am I telling that story? And so we wander around in that story and we don't land the plane or because we're looking for a destination that we're trying to get to. If you know the destination, you're going to take that story start to finish on a straight line. You're not going to be wandering around it. And so it's understanding not just what you need to convey, but what do they need to understand? The story's not about you. Even though it's your experience, your story, the story is about the point that you're trying to make, the lesson learned, and how that can help and impact the person that's listening to the story.
Oh, that's excellent. Now, this is reminding me of a story I want to share, and it is about me, but there's a point to it. And it was so funny because last week I took my mom out to dinner. My mom happens to live in the same town where I lived when I was a brand new sales rep 3 decades ago. And I had gotten a job in sales, Mark, and I was horrible. I didn't sell anything for 60 days, nothing. I didn't sell a pen, pencil. I didn't, it was terrible. And literally on day 61, I was getting ready to quit. I determined that I was going to go back into the office at 5 o'clock that day and hand in my resignation in a thing of shame. And I said, you know what, with some integrity, I'm going to make some calls on the way back to the office. We were door to door cold calling. And sure enough, I had lunch with my wife, my new wife, explained it, felt really, really small. Like I'm going to quit this job. And I walk in the first door I walk into. It's my last afternoon in sales. First door I walk into, the guy goes, "Whoa, I'm glad you came by. We actually need one of those." And so I made my first sale. I went back into the office with an order instead of quitting. And the rest, 3 decades later is history. But what I'm reminded of is, as a new salesperson, truthfully, I didn't know that much about the product. I had very little experience to draw on, but I had one story. And I actually drove by this business the other night on the way home from dropping my mom off after dinner. And I told Leslie, I said, this was the place where I made my first sale. But I had that story, Mark, and I grabbed that story. And everywhere I went in the months to follow, I would say, this reminds me of XYZ company. And I would tell the story of how their office was, they were so frustrated. And I came in and were able to solve that. And I without knowing it, I traded on that story for the next 90 days and grew to where I had a whole, growing library of stories. And this is something I think, I'm curious your perspective on this, but I think sales professionals, if we'll just sit down for 5 or 10 minutes, we could probably list out a dozen or more stories of scenarios where, we have gone in and we've helped solve a problem. And that story, I wouldn't be here today if I didn't, well, first of all, make that sale on the way back to the office. But second of all, I wouldn't be here today because using that story, I hit quota and started, accelerating my sales career off that story. So I'm curious your thoughts on this, because I think salespeople have all kinds of stories to tell, but we tend to lean into the slide deck and the specs and features and all of that when we could just tell a story.
Yeah, absolutely. I get people who ask me all the time, well, where do I come up with these stories? I don't know that I have these stories. And my first response to that is, well, then you're not paying attention. Because what is our life except for just a series of little stories, little experiences that we have that we learn lessons from? But I also say, steal from other people, borrow from them. People who are listening to this, borrow Daryl's story when you're talking to somebody on your team who's struggling to come up with that sale. It's a great story about perseverance, about taking that one more step, and about how it can change the trajectory of your career. The other thing that I hear people say that it reminded me of in your story, Daryl, is, well, I need this whole collection of stories before I can start telling stories. No. How many times did you lean on that one story? And you told it dozens of times. You probably told it to the point you were sick of hearing it. You were probably sick of hearing yourself tell the story. But you've got to remember, the other person hasn't heard it.
Right.
And so you can use that same story, and you may tell it a little differently. You may have a slightly different intent with it. You talked about using that story to help new clients see the transition that they could make, or the transformation that they could make with your product. I turned it around and said, this is a great story to tell to new sales representatives who are struggling. And so you can take the same story and you can teach a different lesson with it if you're intentional about how you're looking at that experience.
I love it.
You know what? So do I. And I like that you brought up the word intentional, because I geek out on the word intentional. And I think whether you're in sales, professional sales leader, even all the way up into, executives and presidents of companies, there's so many different stories you can unpack, but you have to be intentional with the stories. And, I'm going back listening to Daryl's story and then expanding on what you just said, Mark, is, for those that are struggling with story, I started just thinking of just a couple places just now as I was listening to you, Mark. You could be listening to podcasts. You could be watching movies. You could be watching, business shows on, TV or streaming. You can take some of that, what you learned, apply those into how you get a point across by sharing something you just listened to, or something you just read, or something you just watched. The point behind it is there's so many different ways to tell a 3-minute story.
Yeah, we do this little exercise in our master storytelling workshop where we put people in small groups and say, identify all the different areas that you could find an experience that you could turn into a story. And we had to revise the directions on that, because people were like, well, I don't need 3 minutes to say everywhere, because that's the answer, is everywhere. You can find these stories everywhere. We said, no, you be more specific than that. And they come up with things like you just mentioned. They're in the media, they're in podcasts, there are other people's experiences that you can listen to. And I always encourage people to look for those moments where you have an emotional reaction to something. I'll go back to Daryl's story. Daryl had that, we could feel the emotion of Daryl's story, where it was like, I felt like I was failing. The words you use, I felt so small in that moment. We've all felt small. We've all felt that. So we can feel the emotion of that moment. And then on the turn where you get to the change, I made that sale and it launched the trajectory of my career. We feel the relief that comes from that. And so look for those moments that you have an emotional reaction to. There is a story embedded in that has something to teach, lead, sell, and inspire.
I had one observation, but now I have two on this. The first observation is this: trust is the currency of sales. We talk about trust all the time at Selling from the Heart. A little hint: we're about to talk about trust a whole lot more in the weeks and months to come. You'll understand why here very shortly if you like or subscribe to the podcast. But we talk about trust, and how do you build trust? Well, I could go in and I could show you a list of all the companies I've served, which is good. Or I could tell you a story. And the beautiful thing is, as soon as I tell you a story about one of my clients, not only am I taking a complex concept and communicating it, which is a struggle for a lot of people, I'm also including a reference with that. I'm saying there's another company like yours that works with me that I've worked with. So I'm saying it without saying it. And I think that is really powerful. And in addition to trust, and this is what I'm seeing as well, we talk about rehumanizing sales all the time here at Selling from the Heart. We've made it so robotic, but sales is a human-to-human experience. And when we tell stories, as opposed to reading the facts and delivering the slide deck and all of that, we're actually humanizing this, because now we know there's characters and they had emotions and they had, like feelings of frustration and feelings of triumph in all of this. And so the idea of building trust and humanizing, two things that we're really, really passionate about here at Selling from the Heart. Story gives the medium to be able to do that really, really well.
You're spot on. And it's because you're sharing a human experience. And so the other person's going to see you as a human. But there's also some brain science that goes along with that. If I can throw this in here really quick, Dr. Paul Zak at Claremont Graduate University has discovered that there's changes in the brain chemistry when you hear a well-told story. The first thing that you get when you hear an experience that somebody shares that you can relate to, like we could all connect into your experience where you felt small. I'm feeling that. I got an increase of oxytocin in my brain. Are you familiar with oxytocin?
Very much so.
Oxytocin is known as what?
The love drug, right? We're all gonna be bonded and connected.
It's the love drug. It's the trust hormone.
Yeah,
it increases trust. As I'm listening to you, my oxytocin level goes up a little bit, and I trust you more. There's a powerful reason right there to use well-told stories. Now, your intention has to be right. It can't be, I'm going to manipulate this person with this story, because that will come out too. But that's the reason that storytelling builds trust, is it builds an increase of oxytocin because you're connecting as human beings.
Wow.
Oh, this is really, really good stuff. So I want to play on trust, because this involves a story and when to tell one. Is we know where trust sits, right? Trust can just be massively improved inside the sales world. And we know from past podcast guests who have come in and spoken about trust, how trust is built within the first couple minutes of a conversation. So that being said, Mark, from your knowledge around storytelling, how does somebody weave in when, how, in those first couple minutes, do they weave in storytelling to release that chemical that says, I trust that person?
Yeah. And I'm going to switch this around a little bit.
That's okay.
Because this goes right back to that call that I talked about with the person on the other side of the world. The very first thing that I did when I got on with him was I said, so tell me your story. What brought you to this point in the first place?
There you go.
And as they're telling me their story, they're feeling that bond and that connection with me. And then that opens the door to say, oh yeah, okay, so this is like this other client that I work with, and then I can tell my story. But I think that first step of opening it up to say, let me listen to your story, also helps build that bond in those very first couple of minutes of the conversation.
Oh, so hey, Daryl, we just got to keep this going real quick, just really quick. You got to coach us through, because this is good stuff, by the way. Is coach us through that salesperson. I'd just be curious the first couple minutes, right? And by the way, thank you for sharing how you open up that phone call, Mark. But just coach us to a salesperson who's meeting an executive for the very first time, knowing they have to establish trust, credibility. And now they're listening to this podcast going, heck, man, I got to weave into a story into this one as well. How would Mark just open up the first conversation with an executive? You've opened the door. It's a virtual call. Now what happens next in the first minute or two?
Yeah, I think the first minute or two for me is, tell me some of the challenges that you're facing right now. And I might frame it within what I'm offering. And so when I'm talking about storytelling, a lot of times I'm talking about leadership. And so I might say, tell me about some of the struggles you're having with the leadership within your organization. And they might give me very vague things like, well, we have high turnover, or we don't have very good bench strength. And I said, well, give me an example of that. When you say, give me an example of that, that's an invitation for them to tell a story and to really make that connection. And it is really interesting. People love to tell stories, even if they're not doing it as a formal story. People love to tell their story. And so if you're interested enough, if you're active in really listening to them, then you're going to get that out of them. I read this quote, and I'm not going to be able to source it right off the top of my head. It was a psychologist who said this, but he said, "You make better human connections by being interested than you do by being interesting."
Mm.
And I thought that was such a powerful point about listening is really a key to connecting. And it's really a key to be able to connect into the right stories that you would then want to share back with them.
I love it. Well, I know one thing our audience is interested in, and that is how can they get more Mark Carpenter in their lives?
Well, a couple of ways. Come to our website, master-storytelling.com. You have to have that little dash between the master and storytelling to get to us. You can find some free resources there, schedule for the workshops that we're teaching. You can also find the book, Master Storytelling, on Amazon in all of its various formats. If you are an audiobook listener, you have to put up with the sound of my voice for 2 hours and 53 minutes. Not that I know exactly what that timing is. And come find me on LinkedIn. Look for Mark Carpenter and look for somebody in Utah with Master Storytelling and behind me in the picture.
I love it.
And you'll be able to find me. Love to connect with people there, answer any questions that you have.
Good stuff, Mark.
Incredibly powerful and practical. And thank you so much for sharing your stories and your heart with us today. This has been amazing.
It has been my pleasure to be with you. I love the conversation, Larry and Daryl.
Awesome.
Take care, Mark.
Awesome.
Oh,
wow. Daryl. Larry, so much gold to mine out of this conversation on one level. Another level, it's really, really straightforward. Is saying, let's think about stories. When he talked about, well, like we got biochemistry going on in this episode, right? With oxytocin and the love hormone, the trust hormone, and all of these things. These are real things because there's a lot of things that are working against us in sales. But when we can bring story in, I think this is incredibly powerful and practical stuff.
Absolutely. And oftentimes you've heard us say here at Selling from the Heart, authenticity requires practice. Well, guess what? So does storytelling. Storytelling requires practice. It starts with great listening.
That's right. So much here to mine and so much to I know we're going to be talking about this for a long time. And one of the great places to practice and meet people who are on a similar journey to you is inside the Selling from the Heart Insiders group. If you haven't come to hang out with us yet, you're going to thank us when you do. So go to sellingfromtheheart.net/free-pass and come join us for an up close and personal. And we're working on these concepts together so to be more excellent at what we do in sales. Larry, a lot of cool stuff coming up really, really soon. We've been teasing this for weeks, but I'm so excited about what's right around the corner. You're not going to want to miss the shows coming up this winter and spring.
No, you're sure not. There's a lot of stuff that happened behind the scenes last year in 2023. We're going to trickle it all out here soon. Daryl kind of alluded to it a little bit ago in talking with Mark, if y'all were paying attention, and I know you were.
That's right. Well, trust me, this is going to be awesome. So, hey, thank you to everybody who's liking and leaving reviews on the podcast. It helps us spread the word, this movement of authenticity in the profession we all love. We've got great stuff coming up. Until next time, keep being genuine, keep being authentic, keep building trust, tell stories, and most of all,
sell from the heart.